Thank you so much for this wonderful welcome, and I am especially happy that I don't have to deliver my lecture because Your Grace, Bishop Ephraim, you have told everything. And you have analyzed the text which I was going to analyze as well, the Vatican manuscript, the colophon. So what should I think about after that, after such a survey? So please accept my humble contribution. It will be largely overlapping with what His Grace Bishop Ephraim told, but I will project some slides, and perhaps that will be a good addition to it. Basically, this survey that I am going to present, and I have to see not to make it very long, I presented it when we were celebrating the 80th birthday of the Malfoni, the greatest Syriac teacher, Sebastian Brock. And I was very happy to add to all those studies about Syriac learning all over Eurasia and even Africa, an Indian perspective. So even if many things that I will speak about will be known to you, I think it's very important that we emphasize how important the Indian Christian community was for the general development of Syriac learning. And I will at the beginning present a bit of, controversial issues, because I will show how what we call Syrian Christianity or Syriac Christianity in India grew out from Persian Christianity. You have spoken about this in fact, but there will be some repetition. Okay. So, I begin with the Persianate period, because that far can we look back. We know that the history of Christianity in India goes back to earlier times. We originated from the mission of the Apostle St. Thomas here, but for scholarly treatment, we need evidence. And the evidence, besides the oral evidence of traditions, begins later, which doesn't mean that for the time for which we don't have evidence, we don't have to doubt what was there before that time, but it's very, very difficult to treat it from a scholarly manner. And this is, I hope that although we are at the very heart of the Knanaya community, I will not speak about Thomas of Cana simply because we don't have the copper plates. It would be so wonderful to be able to analyze what these copper plates, which were lost in the 16th century, were about, but we don't have them. We only have indirect testimonies. So, I begin with the Persianate period. I am sure you have recognized that what we have here in the background is the cross of Valiapally. And I begin with the name, Suryani Nasranika. And the question, what is the origin of this name? We always speak about the Suryani Nasranika as being Syrian Christian or Syriac Christians. And this interpretation is not new. Especially together with my student, Amy Marin Joy, we were studying a bilingual document from the early 18th century, extant in a Malayalam original and a contemporary Syriac translation by a certain Mattai Vettikunnal, which was sent to Leiden in the early 18th century. And this document, where we can compare the Malayalam text with the Syriac, it translates the Malayalam plural Suryanika as Suryai, Syrians. But it is important to understand that Suryani is a Persian loanword in Malayalam. Suryani was the name of the Christian ethnicity in the Sasanian Empire. And this shows that at least from the 6th century onward, the Indian community considered itself as belonging to the Persian Christian church community. Of course, the Persian Christians were called Suryani for two reasons. Because their liturgy was in Syriac, but also their mother tongue was Syriac, more or less. So I think that's also a foreign Christian. But the Malayali Christians who belonged to this Persian church, their language was of course Malayalam. So they were called Suryani, meaning Persian Christians. His Grace has spoken about the Tarisapali corporates, the Tarisapali chapter, and let me say some words about this most important document, because it is not only the oldest document preserved by the Christian communities, because unfortunately the Knighton and Copperfields have been lost, but it's also the oldest charter in Malayalam that is extant. Sorry for repeating things that all of you know, but I will do it as an introduction. So the copper plates contain a grant given by Ayan Adika, the god governor of Venadu, in the 5th year of the Chera King's Tanuga reign, that is in 849. To a sanctuary and the community around it called the Tarisapali. And it was headed by a person, that the community, a merchant community, was headed by a person bearing the name Maruan Sapirisha. Now there have been all kinds of speculations about what is the origin of the name Tarisapali. And I am afraid I have written things which do not stand. But most probably Tarisapali is a Persian Malayalam hybrid name. From the Malayalam culture, which all of you know, settlement or non-Hindu sanctuary, and also of Tarsa, the early New Persian variant of the Middle Persian Tarsak, derived from Tars, fear, and it means the one who fears, God-fearer, and that was the name of the Christians in the Persian Empire. So although there have been doubts concerning this, Tarisapali means simply the Christian church. The Christian sanctuary, the sanctuary of the God-fearers. And it was a general thing, and we know it from the work of Andreas Narayanan, Cultural Symbiosis in Kerala, that communities which were mostly important for the local kings, for their commerce, work, trading activity, received charters and donations which were connected to their place of worship. So the Tarisapali community was a merchant community who received all kinds of privileges to found an emporium in Kollam, to there were lands granted to them, and there were privileges granted to them. Marwan is a common Arabo-Persian name, often used by Christians. And Sapir Isho is a difficult question, because it is often identified with the ecclesiastic name Sabrisho, the hope of Jesus. But I have some doubts about it. And it can be interpreted from the Syriac. In this case, it would mean Isho, Jesus, the learned. But perhaps even better interpretation is to interpret it from Arabo-Persian, which would be rather Safir Isho, which means messenger of Jesus. So I think, but more study is needed for that. I think it's a Persian one. Isho is, of course, the East Syriac version of Jesus. And there are these famous signatories. You know, this is the 5th copper plate. Normally, these signatures were understood to authenticate the original grant. But I have some strong reasons, which I will not detail here, that they were not, the signatures were not authenticating the original grant, but authenticating a copy, which we have now, the presently extant copper plates, which moreover are dating from different periods. So oldest is the first plate, and the others are copies of copies, apparently. But this shows how important it was for the community to keep an authentic copy of these privileges, of this charter. And apparently there was a merchant guild which was authenticating the copy, signed by Muslim, Christian, Zoroastrian, and Jewish members of the merchant guild. So you see there on the, you don't see anything. Sorry, I am seeing it here. What happens now today? Can we do something there? Yeah, okay. Since when am I speaking without a picture? For a long time? Okay, good. So I'm waiting for the picture, because it's difficult to speak about the picture without seeing it. What should we do now? Can anybody help? So, you see the signatures on the left-hand side. This is the recto side of the 5th copper plate in Kufic Arabic. So the language is Arabic, the writing is Kufic. And then, next to this, there are the Christian signatures in Perczel script, in early modern Persian. Then you have the representatives of the true religion. So how to watch it? Is it? So then you have the representatives of the true religion, which means Zoroastrianism. And finally, you have in Hebrew characters, but in Judeo-Persian, that is to say again in Persian, the Jewish signatures. What does this show us? It shows that Persian was the common language of the older trading communities, and that with the Arabic domination in the trade, in the Trans-Arabian Sea trade, was gradually replaced by Arabic. But in fact, Arabic for the Muslim community. All those communities kept, because this is, how to say, it cannot be earlier than 849, but if it's a copy, that is to say, if the signatures are authenticating a copy, this means that even somewhat later, and even somewhat later, in the full Arab dominance of the Arabian Sea trade, the language of this trade guild was still Persian. Then, what was the liturgical language of the Syrianica? I just illustrated, I couldn't prove in such a short time that the language of communication, the language of trade at those times was Persian. But what was the liturgical language of the Syrianica? We have to ask this question because several scholars have proposed that the Syriac liturgy was translated into Persian, and that the eastern province of the Persian church used Persian as a liturgical language. That was proposed by a certain scholar abroad, and also by pious Malakan. But this is, I think, taken from a particular interpretation of a text in the Chronicle of Syria, which says that Mana, metropolitan of Fars, that is to say metropolitan of Revardashir, in Eastern Persia, translated liturgical texts from Syriac to Middle Persian and sent the books, quoting, to the maritime lands, that is the Persian Gulf, and to India. This is written in the Chronicle of Syria, which is the Arabic translation of an original Syriac chronicle. But if we look into the Arabic text of the chronicle, which uses the precise Syriac expressions, we see what Ma'ana has translated into Persian. These were Madrashe, that is exegetical expositions or doctrinal hymns, memory, that is teaching poems, and Onyata, that is to say, which he says sung in the church, that is the anthems of the changing feasts. These are all parts of the teaching elements in the liturgy and are additions to the Qurbana. So I think that what Ma'ana translated was explanatory material for a Syriac liturgy. There has never been a Persian version of the liturgical text. So we are with a community. Which uses Persian as its secular language and which uses Syriac as its sacred language, mostly liturgical language. But we really don't have any early Syriac documents for India. The earliest inscription is on the door of Kaduthuruthy church, and it dates from, I think, 1540 and so on. And the earliest Syriac text is precisely Vatican manuscript Syriac 22, about which His Grace Ephraim was speaking. At that time, there is another misunderstanding to verify. At that time, the Indian diocese belonged to the metropolitan of Fars, with the center of Revardashir. And although it has been claimed that at the Synod of Valiapally, 410, some Indian bishops participated. This is a misunderstanding, because what we have in the 21st canon of the Synod of Valiapally is not in the original text, but in the rule of the ecclesiastic canons by Archbishop Nisibis, and this is representing a situation which was there when he wrote this. So it represents a contemporary situation, and this is very, of course, very precious, because this is almost the first, but not the first, testimony that the bishopric, which was, as we will see, centered in Shengri, was extending its jurisdiction to the islands, mainly Socotra, the inland, that is India, and also to Dabaj, Java, Sin, China, and Masin, that is Greater China. So it is important to date this testimony to the early 14th century. We will see that it was there even earlier. Abdisho died in 1318. And here comes this famous Vatican manuscript about which now Ephraim was speaking, and its famous colophon. And from this text we learn a lot about Syriac learning in the Middle Ages. You see, this is the title page. The book is titled Apostolic Readings for the Sundays of the Entire Year, the Feasts, the Commemorations, and the Rogations of the Fasts. And it gives, we will see, the exact date of the writing of the colophon. It was in the possession of the Chaldean metropolitan Mar Joseph Sulaka, whom the Portuguese deported in 1568 to Rome, where he died in 1569. And then his manuscripts were incorporated in the Vatican Library. And the manuscript has a very interesting long colophon about which now Ephraim has spoken. But I didn't want to believe when I read it first that this was the one who copied this beautiful book was a 14-year-old deacon from Kodungaru, and we learn a lot from this. It gives the place of life. This holy book was copied in the royal Ashakaita, famous and celebrated city of Shengri, which is in Malabar, in the realm of India, in the holy church named after Mar Kuriakos, the glorious martyr. And although there have been, by Jewish scholars, doubts about the placing of Shengri, because this is in the Jewish law very important, that all the Jews who came to Cochin came from Shengri. And we have also Shingri in the Arabic sources. This is precisely, this colophon is the proof for the identification of Shengri with Kodungaru. Because we know that the Mar Kuriakos church was there, and we know that Kodungaru was the place of the see of the main see of the Indian diocese, where the bishop was, the metropolitan bishop was seated. And we see also that this metropolitanate is later than we would think. So earlier, the Indian church belonged to the metropolitanate of Devarashi, the Metropolitanate of Fars. But we have an earlier testimony as well, although it's an indirect testimony. This is from 1607, from a Portuguese text, which is in the Roman archive of the Jesuit Society, number 65. And the testimony is from 1607 by a certain Syrian Christian priest, the vicar of Valiapally, who was called Jacob of Jesus. And he says, and the Portuguese noted, that there was also known another ancient Syriac manuscript, but then 400 years old, that is copied around the year 1200, in whose colophon the see of Kaduthuruthy and its holder Mark John, and it's important because we know so few names of the bishops who were reigning here, were mentioned, and it was said that the Metropolitan Bishop of Kaduthuruthy also held the title of Bishop of China and Sokoto. And this should be very clearly that thing that we read in the rule of the ecclesiastic canons of Abdisho, that the bishop is that of the islands, the inland, that is India, Zabaj, that is Java, Sin, that is China, and Greater China, that is Nasir. Yes. We learn from the colophon also the name of the Patriarch and of the Metropolitan Bishop of India. The Patriarch was Valiapally, here called the fifth, the third Catholic Patriarch of the East. We don't understand why the scribe writes fifth, because this is Valiapally III, who was an ethnic Uyghur. He was from Beijing, Kanbali, and his monastic name was originally Marcos, and his teacher, Bab Salma, has written about their travel from Beijing to Baghdad. And the bishop was called not Jacob. He is called here Metropolitan, Superintendent, and Governor of the Holy See of the Apostle Mark Thomas. That is Governor of us and the whole Christian India. And here we have a very early testimony to the fact that the See of Kaduthuruthy, which was the See of the Metropolitan See of India, was considered as founded by the Apostle Mark Thomas. This is from 1301. But I think you were speaking about this. You were speaking about this, I think, if I understood it. What is the most interesting for me, however, is the struggle for Syriac learning. And although there was an earlier translation, there was earlier translations based on the Latin translation of Assamani, I have retranslated it because I think with a more precise translation teaches us much about how the Syriac learning was maintained during the Middle Ages and even after that in the Malabar coast. So, I am quoting from the colophon. This holy book with all its due and necessary parts was completed on a Wednesday, something is missing here, of the month, cannot be read, of the month of Chaziran, June, in the year 612, that is to say 1612 of the Greeks, which gives 1301. And to God be glory, and may His love and mercy be abundantly shed upon us. Yes and amen. It was copied by a certain feeble and sinful student, Zacharias, son of Joseph, son of Zacharias, from the aforementioned city of Shem, one of the pupils and spiritual sons of our aforementioned father and governor, one who is called a deacon, but is as far from and as inferior to the perfection of the requirements of his rank as man is inferior to the angel, or as east is far away from the west. So it is clear that here Deacon Zachariah was copying a formula, so it's not his original writing. This is called ecologically written, and he had apparently examples before him. But here comes something which is his personal confession, and I appreciate this very much. He asks and supplicates and demands in the grace of God from all those who read this book and find a mistake or an error, not to throw curses on the sky, which is not becoming to good and wise man, but to bestow upon me instead of this one holy prayer and to say this. And this prayer is very interesting. Lord, have mercy on the feeble scribe who taught according to his power, being a 14-year-old boy and being a foreigner to the reading and speaking Syriac, incapable to read aloud, and who wrote that what he wrote without reading it aloud, and who wrote this apology because of this. So, this is my new translation, and of course I have added, interpreted these parts, otherwise it's wholly incomprehensible. What he wants to say is that he copied the book, but he has never learned the proper pronunciation. And this made it very difficult for him. And for this, he apologizes for his mistakes. And in fact, if you look into the book, you find many mistakes in it. Those mistakes were corrected by a later hand, which might be that of Mark Jacob Slaughter. But this shows how difficult it was to maintain the Syriac learning in a remote land where how to say, the Syriac learning was bestowed upon the community by the bishop. This is why it was very important that very learned bishops should come in. And this is what we see from the history, that this diocese was very important for the Syriac churches, and they chose their best bishops, the most learned bishops, the most learned monks, in fact, to come and teach the people. And the bishop's task was not simply to administer the church. The bishop's task was also to teach Syriac learning. And this structure has remained, although it later had somehow been modified when the institution of the archdeaconate began. And I hope I am not disappointed when I say that it is quite a late phenomenon. It's not dating back to the time of Thomas of Aquin. Okay. Then, for a while, we don't have information is lacking for the period in the Middle Ages until a time of renewal, which I don't know how, perhaps providentially, happened just before the arrival of the Portuguese. You know that Vasco da Gama has landed in Corycó in 1498. We learn from the histories transmitted both by local chronicles, because we have such chronicles. I mentioned that text from Leiden, for example, as local chronicles. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. And also for the Portuguese reports, that there was a long gap in the connection with the East Syriac Mother Church.